Tantra Illuminated with Dr. Christopher Wallace is a journey through the depths of the human experience, as viewed through the lens of the tradition called nondual Shaiva Tantra. This multi-format podcast delves into the fascinating world of classical Tantra and its intersections with philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, human development, and the broader world of spirituality. Today's episode is a conversation, and I'm speaking with Artur Appazov. Artur is a friend of mine, a truly beautiful human in my perception, and I was privileged to witness his awakening process, though from some distance, as we don't live close to each other. He was a student of mine for a somewhat brief time, and he participated in my 6-month immersion program, which for many people is a very powerful experience indeed. And it was during this immersion that Artur experienced what I might colloquially call a mega awakening, really, really huge, profound shift, and which was followed by a year and a half of integration practice, as such shifts must be followed if they are to become stable, grounded, and integrated. So now I get to enjoy this new version of Artur, which is far more open and clear, and really there's no words actually for the difference I see in him before and after. And it's somewhat rare to get to experience that difference. We often, if we encounter someone who's had the shift, we encounter them after it's already complete. And let me mention briefly that there is indeed a significant aspect of this process which completes itself. And there's another aspect of awakening which is never ending. And perhaps in another podcast, I will try to discuss this in more detail. So suffice to say for now that aspect which can complete itself has done so for Artur, as far as I can perceive, and others testify to this too. So he lives in Lisbon and has a coaching practice, both professional and spiritual. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I'm here with Artur Appazov. Welcome, Artur.
Thank you, Harish. Thank you for having me.
This is the first time, actually, that I'm interviewing someone who's a former student of mine, someone who's now very much awake in his own right and doesn't need a teacher anymore, per se, but someone who was my student and did some of my in-depth courses, like my 6-month immersion course some time ago. And I always say you never know who's going to have this shift or when. And so it was such a delight when Artur underwent this shift unexpectedly. And I've seen a total transformation. And now you are just so much lighter, so much freer, so much clearer. And I think in my perception, you laugh more, you smile more, and you're a joy to be around. And, not that you were a terrible person before or anything like that. But, like most people, before the shift, you were, in my perception, somewhat contracted. Like a person, with stuff. And now I perceive just this great clarity and openness, and the kindness of your heart is fully expressed. So it's really just been an honor and a privilege for me to witness this transformation over the course of a few years. So I just want to share that from my perspective. But of course, what I want to invite is for you to share your perspective. Who were you before this shift? What was this shift like? And, of course, it has multiple stages. It doesn't happen just in a moment. And what is life for you like now? So if you sort of start from the beginning and just share as much or as little as you want about this journey, go for it.
Thank you, Harish. Well, beginning has a very relative meaning right now. Almost everything can be a beginning, but let's start somewhere. As you just said that you experienced me or Arthur differently before. And, I was a lawyer my entire life, and I never really had an interest. In awakening per se. I was a very curious person, maybe, and curiosity is what I would say was my path. So I was a lawyer, a pretty successful lawyer, did all sorts of things, from the United Nations to teaching international law to working for an American law firm and all that stuff. And as that career was unfolding, I, at the same time, was very interested since childhood about what's going on, really. What is this whole creation about? And I started having some experiences when I was a child, experiences as early as when I was 6 and 7 years old, when I would have this perception that I am somehow the entirety of the world. But the identity was very much within my body and my mind. And so I would be scared, and I would go to my mom terrified, like, "Mom, what's going on? I'm scared." And she would ask me questions. "What is it that you're afraid of?" And I would say, "I'm afraid of the world itself." And so, of course, she couldn't help me, and she didn't know what was going on. And so that experience lasted, and then it fizzled out, and I just, the life took on, and I just did my legal thing. But at the same time, I was very much interested in the nature of things. So I went into philosophy, and I went into the Buddhist type of meditation and all sorts of stuff. And then my first big shift happened in 2014 or 15, I can't remember exactly, when in a meditation, there was a spontaneous unfolding, maybe one word, but it was just a click when my identity fell so much through and so much intimate into just the savoring of what I am, that it became very clear to me that what I am is just the space itself. And it was very weird to me not to see it that way before. But my mind back then explained to me from a scientific perspective, like, of course I'm space, because if you look at all these atoms, what you fall through is just space. And there was this clarity that I'm space, and everything around is just me, viscerally. And yet somehow, even that experience retained my identity around this body-mind, because it lasted maybe for just a day, and then it disappeared. And then I, again, was pretty much an assembled body-mind Arthur. And so my identity didn't really shift. It was an interesting, peculiar experience. But what happened after is that there was this intuitive understanding of what the world really is, and that somehow everything is consciousness. And then somebody told me, "Hey, Arthur, have you read this book, Tantra Illuminated?" And I was like, "Tantra? I'm not into Tantra." Because for me back then, Tantra was something to do with sexuality, the new Tantra. And that person, bless her, she said, well, no, this is not that kind of Tantra. It's classical Tantra. You should read this book. And so I remember I took that book and I started reading. I was like, oh my God, this guy has figured it out. But I was reading and basically was fascinated by the accuracy of my intuitive experiences, not yet embodied. So I started following you, and then at some point started doing practices and signed up for your immersion program, during all these practices, there was this interesting feeling of almost like knowing as a GN, this aching of that there's something I'm not seeing. There's something that's coming up and I couldn't really put my finger on it until one morning I was sitting on a bench. I was looking around, just being, and there was this person in front of me sitting on the bench in front, and I thought, what a beautiful person. And then I caught myself shying away from that. Not the person, but I thought, what is it that I'm shying away from? And this was the moment of intimacy with my own experiencing, when I gave in to that experience of beauty without shying away from it. So this almost disturbing experience of intimacy. And this is when there was not just clarity, but it's an experience that's really hard to explain, is when the gaze or the seeing recognizes itself as seeing. The seer and the object completely disappeared. It was like they met at seeing, and there was nothing but seeing. And not just that, seeing, hearing, sense, touch, everything at all was just this one beautiful field of awareness that I am, that dances then in all appearances, whether this is a bug crawling on a leaf in perfect unity with everything else, the entirety of the universe, me. Then the next thing that happens is that all that crumbles into complete nothingness. And when I say that, it's just this realization that what appears is nothing. It feels very full. It's viscerally me, but it's also nothing. And the mystery of what it is, nothing and everything at the same time, that source. It was a bewildering experience that never went away. So basically, what I want to say is that something prior to that was experience, and then it was just a natural state. Clarity that is so familiar, yet at the same time, absolutely bewildering. It was nothing like I thought what I was. The entire world I am, because the only thing that there is awareness, and there is nothing else that is possible that wouldn't be awareness, that wouldn't be you. So that's in short.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight something you said there that I think is so important, that you said before this point, this was an experience.
Yeah.
And now it was like the new context for experience. It's a paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I was observing, and when I say I, really, it's just for the figure of speech. When experience was really, when the observation of that, or indulging into that, falling into that, this endless falling into that was taking place, the mind was feasting on it without believing the story about everything, but it was trying to explain it to itself what's going on. But it was more, it felt like a celebration. Oh, it's like this and it's like that. And oh my God, it's like, and it was so stunning to me that this simplicity, the obviousness itself, was so hard to explain to people. It's like, oh my God, do you see that this is you? Like, this is you. What else? How could you be aware of it if it wasn't you? And people are just like, what are you talking about? So the obviousness is quite incredible. Another realization is that, you don't find it, it finds itself. It finds itself, and then it dances itself towards itself in different ways. In my way, it was just this guy, a lawyer, who was just very curious about different things, and I was seeking awakening, but looking for truth in my own way. and then just, you know, dancing itself back to itself, back to its own self-knowledge, almost self-awareness in this particular way. Yeah, so there was this clarity that it's not me who did it. I did not find it. It found itself as me.
Right, exactly. And this is something that often gets missed, that, you know, it's not true to say Arthur the lawyer,
Yeah,
you know, woke up or got enlightened or something like that, but rather that which is wakes up to itself.
absolutely.
Awareness becomes aware of itself. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and the previous persona is kind of just a thought construct. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is absolutely so. Um, and and then the process continued into the persona unraveling or undoing itself
Mm,
in a way that I did not expect would be.
mm,
The first few months, 2 or 3 months, were just this incredibly curious exploration of what it is. And I might elaborate on that a little later, but now I just wanted to speak about this period post awakening that maybe isn't very well known. A few months after that, there was a heavy, you know, relatively period of being intimate with the entirety of myself and everything that I have shied away from.
mm,
So all the pains and fears and whatever else was there, there was no minding or no objection to that anymore. And so all that started to arise for me, or for awareness just to be okay with. And that lasted for 1 year, 1.5 years of a very intense emotional experiences, accompanied by the mind comments, including comments like, oh my God, what's going on? I don't want this. And then immediately caught by the awareness itself. It's almost like, you know, the mind and the body do its thing, but I, the real I, the awareness, that doesn't have the ability to mind it.
mm.
It was just holding what was going on, and it was pretty intense. And at the same time, this incredibly blissful um, holding that and blissful experiences, because most of the time I just spent hanging out in the park
Mhm.
to try to just fizzle this out somehow. And the incredible mystery that I was falling into, or mystery falling into itself without any possibility of landing anywhere. It's just something stunning. It's the mystery that doesn't exhaust itself. And at the same time, it's very simple. It's so simple. And then you find, well, simplicity and fathomlessness is the same thing, really.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point that people often mistake. They confuse simplicity with superficiality
Yeah.
in a way, and
Mm.
this is profoundly simple and fathomless at the same time, as you say.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you spent a tremendous amount of time in this period just sitting on a park bench, and it does remind me of Eckhart Tolle, who did the same thing. Like after his awakening, he spent I think at least a year
Mm.
just sitting on a park bench, you know, because the process was unfolding of its own accord. You just had to like be with it, you know.
Right. Absolutely true. And again, the shift is so bewildering, absolutely bewildering, that the old habit of being Arthur had a momentum of just undo itself. It's facing the truth of what you are, and this old habit. Oh wait, I'm this lawyer thing, and then again, seeing that no, I am the entirety of existence, the infinity itself. Um,
And the mind is what's bewildered, right? Because there's
yeah,
also clarity at the same time.
absolutely.
Yeah,
The mind is what is bewildered,
yeah.
and the paradox that it plays with constantly. And interestingly, the paradox of this, you know, being simple and unfathomable at the same time resolves into being when there's no paradox. It's just so, of course, it's neither nor, because both are just conceptual. And sometimes some compare it to this analogy. Imagine that you're falling, but you never jumped off, you're just falling all the time. There's no possibility of landing anywhere, you're just falling. And at some point you realize that falling is the same as flying, is the same as standing, because you're both falling and standing, because you never jumped off and you're never going to land. So this is somewhat this analogy for...
Yeah, exactly. It feels like free fall.
Yeah.
And then you sort of habituate in a good way to the free fall, and then you can experience it as flying.
Yeah.
So just for the people who have heard, the episode I did a little while ago on the 3 stages of awakening, if I understand correctly, for you, the shift into the Shakta Samavesha, the oneness, everything is what you are, and there's no boundary or dividing line or difference intrinsically. That happened, and also the other, they basically happened the same day, where because you also saw the infinite no-thingness. And so your whole process, basically was 2 years. I mean, of course, it's also never ending, right? That you always see more, experience more. But that 2 years, just to recapitulate, you had the 2 shifts of Shakta and Shambhava Samavesha, the everything and the nothing, you might say, as what you are. And then there was that integration period, that 1.5 years of digesting whatever came up to be digested, or experiencing whatever came up to be experienced. And you said it was very intense sometimes, but there was also this knowing of okayness underneath it. Yeah, because I had asked you a while back, like, oh, why didn't you reach out to me when things were getting so intense, and and you said, oh, because I knew that it was actually okay.
Yeah Absolutely.
So I'm just rephrasing in terms of that language that some listeners know, but as always, if there's a slight misunderstanding on my part, always please correct me and elaborate.
That is perfectly accurate. In fact, that for me, the shift was so profound. And then when we talked about the stages, like, well, isn't it one stage actually? Because you just go all the way to infinity, right? But apparently there can be a significant gap between the second, as what tradition describes as the second stage, the Shakta Samavesha, and then the Shambhava Samavesha. So for me, maybe there was, I don't even know if there was a gap, or there was just 1 second of a gap between the second and the third, because it was just this fullness, and then the mind caught up with the fact that the fullness is just, let's say, an iteration, or what appears as an iteration of what I really am. And that was the feeling of this incredible mystery nothingness, not nothingness that I can capture in any imagining. It's not nothingness that is a thing. It's not nothingness that tucked away anywhere. It's just this one nothingness that everything is, that then presents itself as space, as time, and everything within space-time. And what is presented is just one beautiful apparition out of countless apparitions. And there is not just knowing, but there is clarity that I'm almost all of that. And the world as me arises spontaneously. That is a lot to take for the mind.
Yeah. But you just said it so beautifully. Like the fullness is the fullness of being, of dynamic activity, of the world, the appearance of a world. All that fullness is an expression of what we are. You said iteration, it's the same thing. And that it's an expression of that no-thingness, which, the problem with talking about it is that if you haven't experienced it, you just get the mind's imagination of of nothingness, or void, or which is, it's not that.
No,
It's nothing like the mind's imagination of it, and it cannot be imagined,
no,
or
absolutely. Yeah.
named, of course. Yeah.
In fact, there was this as the mind was indulging, and actually the awareness itself was indulging with knowing itself as that, and seeing itself as all these arisings. At some point, the fascination with that examining quieted, and the attention turned into the nothingness itself. And this is when that nothingness became uh, quite a dominant in a way. If it's even if I don't know if it's a good word to use, but it became highlighted as an experience, or as intuition, because it's not an experience, or knowing, or being this incredibly, profoundly, incomprehensibly powerful, vast, and at the same time nothing. And in fact, the experience of that nothing is such that if the moment it expresses itself as anything at all, you can pick up words, feelings, anything that what I say is already its expression. It itself, this nothing, always unseen. It is felt as being, but it's never is there for grasping.
Yeah, it can never be an object of perception at all.
Never, ever. Yeah, that was this was maybe, I don't know if it's another shift. It's not another shift, it's just this clarity that crippled into itself in that way, that this mystery is this is where I remember the tradition calls unreachable, unachievable, or unseeable, and then, okay, this is totally what it is. And at the same time, what I want to stress is that it's not tucked away anywhere. It's wherever you poke into an apple or into yourself, is it fully and 100% just and only it, that just flowers, or presents itself as that beautiful something. And at that point, there's also this seeing that there's no need to call it an apparition or a dream, as many traditions call it, because what do you compare it to, this dream? Nothing. So this dream is also real, but also is a dream, and it's sacred. It's sacred in a way that we can phrase it or articulate it in this way, that infinity wants to know itself. It's unknowable even to itself. It wants to know itself. It goes into this expression and is fascinated by itself as something, and then is reaching back to itself as infinity. So there's this interesting, beautiful, like Shiva Shakti kind of union happening, that only then you see how this is what is meant. Like,
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
See, this is interesting, because we sometimes say, like, it expresses as a world, or as the qualities of experience. It manifests so that it may know itself, but that's in a way a bit wrong, because the expression is the knowing. It's not one and then two. Right? The knowing of itself is in every moment of the expression.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. It's not a knowing that, there's a knowing, I'm going to figure it out.
Right.
It's the knowing in the moment as it expresses itself. And this is what, in my experience, is love, really. It's not a romantic love. It's just this allowing to be so unknowable to itself, yet reaching out to itself at something.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And what, that's, we're going to go on with the interview, but you almost just want to breathe and rest in that forever, because that's it. That's everything. That is there's
true.
Nothing more to say, because if you grasp that, not that it's literally graspable, right? But if you experience and see that as the nature of reality, there is nothing more. There's that feeling. But there's always more to discover.
Yeah.
But there's nothing more fundamentally. And this is like quite hard to explain because the words don't touch it. They don't touch it at all. Um, and so they can only be pointers that, for someone who's glimpsed this, their pointers can,
Yeah,
help orient them back to it. And if somebody's experiencing this, it's just giving words to it,
absolutely.
which are always inadequate, of course.
Absolutely. And in fact, the mysteries, I call it mysteries, it's one of the favorite ways I refer to it, mystery or infinity. The mystery is so fresh, and there is no possibility of any landing there, that, staring at a white wall is satisfying and mysterious and unknowable for the rest of infinity.
Yeah.
And this is why, as you say, talking about it is delighting in itself, and it can do it just really endlessly.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's the Sanskrit word I want to mention because it captures what you're talking about, nityodita, which means ever arising afresh, like forever arising afresh.
Beautiful, yeah,
And
forever.
that's it. And that's it. And so that's why, it's like sometimes I say, if you think this moment is not fresh, if you perceive it as a repetition of a previous moment
Mm.
and boring and dull and unfresh, it's precisely because you're seeing through the mind and with the mind,
Yeah,
because it is literally ever fresh.
absolutely. It is ever fresh. And that also touches on one point that I would like to make, that the unraveling is ongoing. And you mentioned that as well. It is also ongoing uh, in terms of how the body mind and how its old habits constantly come up, less and less so, but they present themselves. And whenever there is a illusion that this is it, I got it,
Mm.
then you want to revisit that again, because the curiosity about that, putting a question mark at every thought, that, oh, this is what's happening actually right now. Is it really what's happening right now? Whether this is in the daily interaction with other people, but there's always something that comes up to be seen, in addition to the seeing of your nature as consciousness. There's always this body mind that lurks there and wants to make a thing out of it. And so an invitation to consider whether that imagining of what's happening, or imagining this is what it is actually it. And this then, and only then, when this free fall of freshness is there, as it's just nothing, there's nothing to grab, nothing to nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I talked about this with Adyashanti once. This is one of the paradoxes, and as you said, the paradox resolves in direct experience of what is. In fact, all paradoxes
All paradoxes.
resolve, and yet, when we're speaking from the point of view of the mind, which we have to when we're using words, at least to some extent, we speak in terms of paradox, but that's not to imply that there's any tension, right? Because it resolves itself. But one of the paradoxes is this thing of being done, and yet it's ever unfolding. Because I talked about this with Adya, because the Buddha himself, at a certain point said, uh, that which needed to be done is done, and yet it's ever unfolding. So it's like, I don't know if we can put any word or concept to that, but for example, you had this year and a half of the super intense digestion, and you're acknowledging, and thank you for acknowledging that after that, still what like habitual tendencies of the body mind arise, and there's more that can be digested or resolved or seen more clearly, and yet there's this time, at the end of that year and a half, when the bulk of what needed to come up had come up, and that then you have this ability to simply rest,
Mm.
like in what is as your default state, this wakeful resting in what is as your default state.
Yeah.
And it's just that you can't choose when that moment is, right? Because the process has its own life.
Hmm.
um, but do you have any idea about what that shift is from the intense period, in your case, year and a half, of all that digestion and everything, to a paradigm in which there's still unraveling, there's still unbinding, but it's no longer that super intense period.
Right.
It's a different kind of easeful flow.
Yeah. Um, that within which, figuratively speaking, all that happens, even the intensity of digestion is what tradition calls it, of this period of samskaric unfolding, happens in and as that incredibly peaceful infinity that just is present as all of that and with it, and there is no minding, but the intensity of these experiences, intensity of unfolding, is so gravitationally poignant
Mm-hmm.
in a way that attention gets mesmerized by it. I wouldn't say
Mm.
trapped, but the attention is there as this is a point of gravity for its enchantment. And so as that comes up and the enchantment is satisfied by the poignancy of the experience itself, by the poignancy of the intimacy with that experience, intimacy that is unconditional, complete letting go, letting in. And it's, what Buddhists would say, of self-liberating. Then it just liberates itself. And
Mhm.
the more that experience is taking place, the more that unfolding is happening, the more the digestion is happening, the less of these gravitational nodes remain. And so then the attention just rests and it starts to notice itself more. And so there's this, then it's just present to itself in this peaceful ocean that is just, there's less wind, there's less waves, and it's just resting. And then, the occasional blurps, kind of things that are happening, and they're welcomed with this beautiful embrace of just like, oh, what's happening here? Hey.
Yeah. Okay. So now this is a beautiful way of talking about it. Now I have a kind of image of just as of course, just metaphor, as all words are when we're talking about this. Um, that it's, you said gravitation, like that there's a gravitational mass of
Mm,
samskaras, or things waiting to be digested, that want to be liberated in
right.
the light of awake awareness.
Yeah.
And when enough of them have been liberated, it's like your craft, which was in orbit,
Mm-hmm.
achieves escape velocity,
Mm.
not because of more speed, which it doesn't need, right? But just because the gravitational mass is less. Something like
This is
that
a
as a
really this is a really cool way
well,
to talk about it. Yeah.
this is my profession, is to come up with these
Ah.
metaphors. Yeah. Okay. So, but I also want to mention one thing, because this is really important, and I want you to say more about this if you like. But that a lot of people out there are doing what they call shadow work.
Yeah.
Whether they call it, I'm dealing with my shit, and I'm doing the psychological work, and facing my shadow and everything. But in my perspective, we'll see if you agree,
Mm.
that when you try to do this before the shift of awakening, that it's a little bit like a hamster running in a wheel,
Mm.
because you are looking at real stuff, and acknowledging where you have blind spots, and contractions, and shadows, and some skatas, and all that. But your identity is so bound up in all of that, that
Mm.
it's hard for any of it to liberate itself.
Mm.
So rather, you're sort of coming to terms with your shadow, but you're not actually liberating it. Whereas after awakening, it's a whole different ball game. It might be
Yes.
also incredibly sort of painful for a time, in a way, of grueling, even though there's of course that underlying sense of okayness.
Yeah.
That it's actually getting liberated, because there's no identity left for the stuff to stick to
Right.
when it
Yeah.
arises, and that difference is so dramatic that that's why I advise people, pray and practice for awakening, open to awakening
Hmm.
first, and don't try to like do all. It's not that it's wrong to do therapy and shadow work and stuff, but that like investing so much energy in it instead of waking up first seems like a
Mm.
self-defeating project. And I'm curious if you agree or disagree. um, and I know from what you shared before that in that year and a half of digestion and whatever we call it, like, no, there's no word that can quite capture that, but that you went through, what people would normally call utter nightmares, like, horrific nightmares, and disgusting, like the whole range was there.
Yeah.
And it's a you would never want someone to be as it were to go through
Yeah.
that as a separate self. It would be just too
Yeah.
horrible.
I wasn't even. I wouldn't even imagine this would be possible
Yeah.
to go through. But what you're saying, I have kind of a double perspective on that.
Mm.
When that work, shadow work, is done, and it often is done in order to escape, so that there is this, I'm doing this so that I don't want to feel something that I don't want to feel. And here, if we go back a little bit into, not go back, but if we go into psychology a little bit, there's this core pain story that we hold. And that story is often nonverbal. It's on the level of visceral experience in the body, the feeling, and then the story comes that we experience early in the childhood. And then we form a story that is completely opposite to that pain story. Just can call it a pain story. And then that alternative story, we hold on to it for dear life, because that story, if we prove that story, then we are not that which we are afraid to be. And so then our entire life is a strategy of how to keep this alternative story alive.
Like the story, I'm a great person, actually.
Exactly. I'm a great person. What is going to get me belonging, love, appreciation, attention, all that thing. So we learn what it is that will bring us that. And so shadow work sometimes becomes the support for that alternative story, because it is received by the mind as, okay, how do I do something else so that I don't feel this thing? And because there's this imagining that I want to, and normal that I want to feel better, but I don't want to feel this. I want to feel this good thing.
I want to do the shadow work to get rid of the shadow.
To get rid of the shadow, exactly.
Yeah.
So there is this, so that part, as I call it, there is some kind of imagination happening. But if that same work is done with the curiosity of what's true here, because what is what is. It's right here. It's truth is what is in front of your eyes, figuratively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you feel shitty on a certain morning and you say, oh, I'm just going to go and just do this wonderful thing or repeat affirmations so that I feel great, well, you're not in touch with what is, and you're not in touch with what's true for you. So that's one way to do the shadow work. And another way is to ask, what actually is happening here? How do I really feel? What do I really think about myself? And very deep down in many individuals, there is this, I am unworthy, I am unlovable, I am alone, I'm isolated, I am powerless, I'm hopeless, I'm helpless. If you drill all the way down. And so if you can be intimate with that, if it is, of course, your thing, maybe it's not, but that's the thing, is it or is it not? If you go down and you be intimate with that, and then put a question mark at the end of that story, you will find that it is not true. But you have to see it first to even question it. And this is where it's hard to go for many people.
So, just if I understood you right, it's like you sense this feeling that you could express in words as, I am alone.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you go into it, you let yourself feel what's there, and then you turn it into a question like, am I
Absolutely.
alone?
Absolutely.
But the key here, right, is that you can't answer the question with the mind, because the mind that's absorbed spiritual philosophy will just say, "Oh, actually, I know
Ah,
I'm not alone. I'm one with everything. They
exactly.
told
Yeah.
me," you know. But you
Absolutely.
have to ask the question genuinely and actually investigate the answer experientially.
That's why I always use the word intimacy. It's very honest intimacy with yourself. No bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to be with, but if you investigate it, actually this intensity is okay. And that's why, when you say that it's possible post awakening, because there's no minding post awakening, all that is seen with clarity. That what I truly think about myself is this and this and that. But then that is not even true. But I wouldn't know that this is not true until I admitted it and looked at it.
Mm.
And so this entire industry of shadow work or
Mm.
reaching out for awakening can be actually an impediment.
Of course, yeah, yeah. And I just caught something subtle in what you just said, that in a way, to do this inquiry, you have to open to the possibility that what you're afraid of could be true.
Absolutely.
Maybe I am absolutely alone.
Absolutely.
Maybe I am meaningless or whatever.
Beautiful.
Yeah, because otherwise the inquiry is not genuine.
Absolutely. That's a
That's
that's
that.
a very good point, because this is commitment to truth.
Mm,
Awakening, if we want to call it that way, is commitment to truth.
mm,
And it can be propelled by two forces: curiosity or suffering.
mm.
Oh,
Or both.
or both at the same time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so coming back to shadow work, somebody might say, okay, I don't do shadow work to get rid of my shadow. I do shadow work to resolve my shadow. But sometimes it could be just another way of saying the same thing. It's
Yeah.
like dressing it up in nice language, but it's like actually you want to resolve the shadow so that you're rid of it. And if that's the motive, that's when it's really not going to work. And that's why we talk about self-liberation in tantra,
Mm-hmm.
right? That these so-called shadows, and we don't need to call them that at all, but they liberate themselves.
Absolutely.
And part of how that happens is that there's no um, separation in which you're looking at the so-called shadow and saying, this is the bad thing, but I'm going to work with it. It's
Mm-hmm.
simply allowed to arise. Like in your experience, especially in that year and a half of the maximum intensity, like what is that all you had to do, is simply allow what needed to arise, or was there something else that needed to be done there?
Yeah. When if your goal is phrased in this way, I'm going to do shadow work so that I get rid of the shadow, it's a trap. Because
Mm,
there is so that I get rid of the shadow, you have already assumed that this is a shadow. I don't want this. I want to push it away. There is an agenda.
yeah.
So, how truthful is the inquiry there? And this is where I dial back on what you said previously, that subtle point that you caught, that you need to be open to the possibility that this might be true. So, there is no agenda at all. It's just what's true here. And in this 1.5 years, it was that. What is true here? Maybe am I actually completely powerless? Is this the what's going on? Because this is the feeling. It's true, and it feels like I want to just crawl under the carpet, you know. And then there's only that. There is a question mark. Is this so, or is this just a story? And then the clarity. Well, this is just a story, and then it is self-liberating, but not before.
Mm.
It's not. I'm gonna look at it so that you go away. There is a pushing away right there. You're not gonna look at it because of that.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get into this just a little bit more, because it, it seems to me not quite as simple. And you weren't saying this, of course, but it's not quite as simple that you believe the story, I'm powerless, and therefore you feel powerless,
Mm.
right? There's a contraction,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like a vicious cycle. There's a feeling that expresses as story that then
Absolutely.
reinforces the feeling, and we can't find a beginning, like it's like chicken and the
So
egg.
true.
You're not going to find
Absolutely.
the beginnings,
Yeah.
and you don't need to.
Absolutely.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not just the story that's liberating itself, it's the contraction, like
Hmm.
the fearful contraction of I might be powerless,
Yeah.
or however we characterize that contraction. And we don't even need to see the contraction as something bad, right? But it's something that wants to liberate itself.
Hmm.
And so, in other words, if it's not as simple as just, Byron Katie style, see, oh, my story's not true.
Yeah.
It's like, is the missing piece there, that you need to go into the feeling, be willing to be with it, be willing to become it,
Absolutely.
and but at the same time not subscribe to the story.
Exactly. And thank you for pointing it out. It's definitely, when I say powerless or any other word that is a descriptor to what's going on somatically on the level of feeling, is a story
Mm,
already.
mm,
So what the invitation is, the openness to that feeling or that somatic intensity itself without any reservation, to really drop into it, intimacy with it, and then seeing that can be called hopelessness, but that can also be called different things. That then you see that, okay, there, it's a story. This is where decoupling is taking place.
mm-hmm,
It's not this intellectual decision, okay, oh, I'm hopeless, or actually I'm not, because let me show you why not.
mm,
That helps to satisfy the mind, but really is the clarity of storyless experiencing the intensity itself and finding nothing there but just that intensity. And then it is self liberated, because when you drop into that intensity and you savor it, like you savor your favorite ice cream,
mm-hmm.
you don't savor your ice cream like, okay, I'm going to taste it so that something happens. You just go into it fully. There's just this almost like endless dropping into that flavor of the ice cream. And if you go into your intensity with the same um, stance or attitude,
Mm.
there will be beauty in that as well, because it's just the life itself that blossoms in this way. And what happens when something blossoms? It withers. So it presents itself and then it withers. And then, you find that, okay, it's all just one thing
Yeah.
expressing
And
itself.
it like has to blossom before it can wither.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
has to
It's
blossom.
like everything just wants to have its life
Yeah.
in a way, and
Yeah.
and complete its life cycle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so something really important, just to highlight, that as you said, even one word is a story.
Yes.
So it's not as simple as saying, "Oh, I'm going to go into my sadness." It's more like, I'm going to go into what is there to be experienced that I have been calling sadness, and
Mm.
going into it with that understanding that not that even a single word is already a story, and so that therefore you keep that door of curiosity open.
Yeah.
So that's one piece, and then the other piece that you're highlighting so beautifully is, we are afraid of intensity, and I would add, we're afraid of intensity because as children we couldn't withstand much intensity
Right.
because we're just children, right?
Right.
And that's the key, that as adults we approach the intensity and it triggers the fear of the child,
Mm.
because that's when the samskaras got laid down, is one way to explain it. But then we discover, oh, there's nothing wrong with intensity. It's not going to hurt me. I have
Mm.
an ability to be intensity and be with intensity that I didn't have before. And that's why it's like the fear is disproportionate. It's exaggerated compared to what
Yeah.
you're actually going to experience. Even if what you experience is really fucking intense,
Yeah.
it's not what the mind projects when it approaches the intensity.
Absolutely. Absolutely so. And as this work unfolds, there's also no need to go fish for anything. It presents itself. You're chopping something in your kitchen, and then you feel something like, oh, what is it? What's true here?
Mm.
and you be with it. It's not like, okay, now I'm going to sit and meditate and I'm going to go get this fear out and I'm going to work with it and wrestle with it. You just present, and it presents itself when it's ready. But it's that beautiful, what you beautifully articulated. It's just that intimacy, that presence with it, and noticing how it can be described differently, that the story about it is so different, and that the story originates back in the childhood.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to mention, because somebody might be listening and having a misunderstanding that, because I mentioned at the beginning that you were a student of mine before. The thing is, when you wake up, you wake up out of doctrines too. Even if you've been following a spiritual path, you wake up from the doctrinal aspect of that path. And so it's not the case, and just in case anyone thinks this, it's not the case that like Arthur's here, like, he learned my doctrine and now he's espousing. It's not at all, because what I sense in you so clearly is you have discovered all this for yourself.
Yeah.
The path just made the awakening possible, or helped it be possible, whatever, and then you discovered it all for yourself, and you're coming at it fresh. And if we have agreement, we have agreement just because we've experienced many of the same things and had the same insights. But there is literally no, on this level, there's no doctrine to be espoused. This is just about sharing the reality as best we can in words.
Absolutely. The doctrines are, structural scaffolding for people just to orient themselves on this path. But as Adyashanti beautifully talks about it, that any teaching must necessarily burn itself and then burn the ashes, and then and only then the ultimate is realized. And that is so true. The doctrine must be left behind, because it's ultimately just you. And as long as you keep the doctrine in the head, as if, oh, that thing is going to do this onto me, the intimacy is disallowed. You need to come to terms with the fact that this is actually you, or just the possibility that this is you. How you do that, you just become intimate with that. But yeah, different doctrines, different languaging, different pointing. When I read Dzogchen texts, for example, I find them incredibly beautifully pointing towards exactly the same reality, but in a different way. And we agree because we come from the same tradition. I don't even think that I come from any tradition. But because we savor linguistically that same very thing in maybe different ways. That's it. How infinity can be linguistically arranged in one way, it cannot. In billion ways, countless ways, you can talk about it because it's nothing.
Yeah. And there's this delight that, it's like I get to learn from you, because like you can always come up with new ways to language things, and every new way of languaging, it's like it points the hearer back towards it. Once they've experienced the ground of being, or whatever we're calling it, it points them back towards it, and they delight in it, from yet another angle of perception of the infinite angles of perception. There's that. Let's come to, at least briefly, like what your day-to-day experience is, or what your default state is. And the question I want to ask is the metaphor of Shiva and Shakti and their union enough, if anything can ever be enough, to describe your default state? And for those who don't know, if we taking Shiva as sort of the formless, the formless absolute, and Shakti as the absolute with form, and that they're really not different. In fact, they're in union, and that the reason that Tantra has that image of Shiva and Shakti in sexual union is not about sex. In fact, it's about the oneness of form and emptiness, if we want to put it that way. And two aspects of that which has no two-ness is how would you describe your default state or your everyday experience, and is that metaphor sufficient, or would you bring in another perspective?
My default state is really hard to talk about. Its timelessness and nothingness, where or that appears as everything, where there's Arthur thinking, there's Arthur doing stuff, but the depth or the core, the heart of it all is this timeless wonder, just timeless acuteness in a way, where then this beautiful thing happens and every second is a surprise. I have no idea what Arthur's going to say next, what he's going to think next. So, but the identity isn't centered anywhere in particular, and generally there isn't a necessity now already to even articulate it in any way, even in the way of Shiva and Shakti. But often it comes back to play with itself in this way when there is a moment of just this spontaneous heightened intimacy, in a way, when there is again this like, but how is this possible? How is this possible that it's just so impossible to apply anything in terms of origin or why or how, or, and this is where Shiva Shakti analogy can come, and this beautiful nothingness then presents as everything, and then presents as nothing, and then presents as everything, and this mutual striving towards each other. If we just like the linguistic formulations, this implosion and explosion at the same time. It's just this blossoming or flowering. It's you know, it's just that you can sit and drool in a way for a little bit.
And it does, you know, I said it's not about sex, but in a way it is about lovemaking, right? It's not about the literal sex, although of course you can experience lovemaking while having sex, but you can experience lovemaking anytime, anywhere, and it's just really a metaphor, but it has something of that quality, right? The nothingness appearing as something, you know, it's that it's somehow that it's all like an expression of intimate communion with itself in a way, right? And that's why it can have this blissful or even or kind of orgasmic quality, and that maybe that's why that metaphor came about. But what I kind of hear you say is that, you can use that metaphor in like teaching or explaining, but that like it can't capture the direct experience. And so every time you try to describe it, it's like here's a little bit different language is spontaneously arising.
Absolutely. This the bliss of awareness has no origin or explanation, and it's just that's just what it is. There's no reason for it to be, yet it is just blissful. And you know, the mind can just like, wow, why is this blissful? I have no idea why this is blissful, because just that's what nature is. It's blissful. It's blissful when is available to itself without distracting itself in its own game or play or the stories, which it also delights in.
Yeah, and maybe we could say the reason the why question doesn't work is because it's always in time. It's like asking about causality, which is temporal, and we're trying to talk about the nature of reality, which produces what we call the experience of time, but it in and of itself is timeless,
Mm-hmm.
and so therefore that's why the why question can never actually make sense.
Good point. Very good point. When I describe this, I use this wording said on the level of the game, or there's no level, but when we just take the game itself, the arising, the apparition of life, when there are these apparent differences, and there's arises an experience of time, and then there arises an experience of the causality, that something earlier in time links to something later in time, from the perspective or as the nature itself, as the true nature, there isn't any causality and there isn't anything earlier or later. The whole thing arises at the same time, because your memories, or your past, better said, your past is nothing but memories. All of that arises within now as wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
It's not arising one, then another, and then the present moment is somehow subject to these restrictions of this causality. It's the present moment, and that within the present moment of memory that we associate with the time arises at the same time. And then within that game or play, there can be all sorts of causalities, and it's blissful because that happened, or this is because that. But
okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, this is potentially mind-blowing. That we might try to account for the character of present moment experience in terms of the past.
Yeah.
But since the past only exists as memories and impressions in the body, which are now, what we're really doing is creating a story that links certain elements of present moment experience to certain other elements of present moment experience.
Absolutely. That's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And in fact, it just links itself. There is no you really there to link anything. So that's why, there's also this the tradition points it out very well, that it's inherently free. It's also free from anything past. I wouldn't be free if the infinity would just like, oh, damn, this happened 13 billion years ago. Now I've got to play it out. Instead, the entirety of creation arises within now and only within now. And so if it decides to play a different game like that, your entire past is rewritten, just for the sake of an example, and you wouldn't even notice. You would have a different history of the universe, and you would be super scientific about it and proving that, hey, here's the causality. What are you talking about? Infinity doesn't give a damn. It just arises as wholeness, as the whole pattern, and then dances spontaneously, beautifully. And then within it, of course, there's whatever else you want to link it as. That's how it experiences itself, by creating this play, display.
Yeah, and in fact, so there's a thing in physics right now where some physicists are debating and saying, oh, now that we look at this evidence, it may be that the universe isn't 13 billion years old, it's actually 20 billion years old. And they're saying as if, we're in an objective universe and we just hadn't evaluated the data correctly, or we saw more data, when it might be perfectly true to say, oh, in one moment the universe was presenting as a 13 billion year old looking universe, exactly. And now it's presenting as a 20 billion.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. and that we can only, it's so easy to miss that like when we look into the past, it's like we're just looking deeper into the present. And in fact, like the astrophysics is there to show us that, because when we look far, far, far away, we're also looking back in time, right? But we're literally just looking deeper into the present, and it gives us a different story about our experience. And it's like the universe is infinitely deep.
Yeah.
And as you say, if it were to reconfigure itself, you would never know the difference, because your memories could also be reconfigured in an instant.
Yeah.
Which is also great news from the point of view of this so-called shadow work, people imagine like, I can't change my past. What happened is what happened. But actually, your experience of what you call the past, which is something present now in your body and your mind, could be rewritten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
could
absolutely.
be radically different.
Absolutely. And it's even crazier than that, because being grounded in that timelessness, nothingness, there is clarity that eternity or infinity is not a very, very long time. It is actually literally no time. It's this reposing within itself without any resolution or possibility of resolving into anything continuous. It's both continuous and capturable, but at the same time not moving anywhere. And the eternity is an overwhelming experience for the mind, because the mind itself is a product of, space-time thing,
Right.
and for it, it's just bewildering. And so, what is appearing as, let's say, a world of time and space and so many things that are happening, consider that all possible worlds are happening at the same time. All of that has begun, is lasting, and has already ended. So you, as your true nature, the being that you are, is not limited to any, let's first do this world, then let's do this other world, and there's like a lineup of the worlds. It is blossoming infinitely into all of that, and at the same resting within itself as complete mystery. This is mind-blowing. Literally.
Yeah, because the mind can't handle it. It has to sort of melt.
Yeah.
And for the listeners, I just want to mention that, when we put it in words like this, it sounds esoteric. It might sound like philosophy, right? But that's how the mind hears it. Because I know, Arthur, you're just talking about what is apparent,
yes.
What is obviously the case.
Yeah.
It's not something you arrive at through by thinking through the nature of reality conceptually. It's just what you when you don't have this contracted separate self, or this limited identity, and you can just sort of sit back into the universe. It's like, this is simply what's obviously apparent, and when the insight arises, it's wordless. It's here getting translated into words, and you see it literally couldn't be any other way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very simple in a way, and that also what surprises me every time I talk about it is how phantasmagorical almost it sounds. It's a very simple yet mind-blowing thing, but any articulation is really just a translation of direct experience from non-dual talk into dual talk. Let's put it that way. And it does sound like, whoa, this is like Star Wars movies. And so the invitation here is not to be hung up on that and just investigate for yourself. Is this so? How is my structure of reality truer than what I hear? So it's always the invitation to consider for yourself, and consider right here and right now, instead of picturing this like, whoa, this is great, I want that, because it sounds so amazing.
Yeah, that's a key point. So if people hear like, oh, I want to experience things the way this guy Arthur is, like, even though the shift, or at least the beginning of the shift, can happen in a moment, right, and then develop its own momentum and all that stuff, you can't sort of get there. Not that there's literally anywhere to get, but by, if you want it as a state, then you're objectifying it, right?
Yeah,
if you hear, I this sounds good, I want to experience like this, it's okay to have that thought, right? But it's as if the longing needs to mature into simple longing for truth.
Yes.
For this to actually start clicking.
Absolutely. In fact, a good question to ask would be, what if all this is just bullshit? And then go and have a look for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. The truth can withstand
Yeah,
any degree of interrogation, right? You
absolutely.
can't if your spiritual path is predicated upon not asking the question, what if everything my teachers have told me is bullshit? Then it's way too conceptual.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, you know, I sometimes call you the Buddha of the bench because, of course, you still enjoy to sit on that bench in Lisbon,
I do.
where the where the shift occurred and some of the unfolding occurred. Um, and you, one thing you love to do now, I know, is to support people or guide people or coach people
Yeah.
who are in this process at any stage of the process, or even who aren't yet in the process but are
Yeah.
orienting towards it. So what is that work like? You know, why do you feel inspired to do it? Like, what can you say about this um, way of supporting people, and how that's arisen for you?
Um, it actually arose quite spontaneously. I was talking with my friends about this first, and then developed a more structural approach as an offering to people. And this is not because I want to save the world or make it a better place. It is not that it's a bad thing to do, it's a wonderful thing to do. But it's because I actually really take joy in it. I think it's a wonderful thing to see how people or how consciousness gets back to itself by playing itself out in these conversations that I have with them. And the way I do that is by, again, inviting again and again, dragging them back into the direct experience. Because if we start with, oh, I want that, okay, why do you want that? What's important for you about that? And if it's somebody who is more versed and they have the view, either tantric view or Buddhist view, and then I ask them to explain how exactly are you not that nature. And by that, they show me what it is that they hang up on. They can say, well, even if it's just a non-dual experience, well, because there is this body, and of course there is outside and there is inside. And so gradually I ask them and then show them, redirect their attention to where there is an assumption that hasn't been checked yet. And this work is pretty effective. People who I work with, there's for now, in a year of my work, there's 3 people who have recognized the recognition. And so it's really just this like dragging back into the directness of experience, inviting that directness again and again. And there is beauty in seeing, that smile and spark in people's eyes when they either getting close or they start being intimate with themselves. And as they start being intimate with themselves, all this samskaric stuff start to come up. So I support people working through that as well. So there is joy in that. And also what this also developed from the other coaching that I do, more general career stuff related professional coaching. So this was kind of like a branching out, almost natural thing to do that.
And one question I have, because you mentioned, because of right, or facilitated by this coaching, 3 people at least have had recognition, a waking up kind of thing. But how do you know, if you can know, the difference between a powerful experience of awakeness or an experience of the nature of reality and an actual shift? Is it just a wait and see thing because if it's the shift, that it's permanent, and if it's the experience, it's not? Or do you have any way to kind of tell which it is?
For me, the measuring stick usually the disappearance of subject-object. And there is a way to test it by asking questions, whether a person just trying to play it or whether this is their genuine experience. And this is just the first tiny step to recognizing the non-dual nature of everything. after which there is, catching the stories part that comes. And this touches on what we discussed earlier, that post that shift, when there is a recognition of the non-dual nature, the rest is more readily available. So for me, that is the kind of the benchmark. If awareness has become aware of itself as awareness, this is when for me it's a recognition.
Yeah. So what's an example? And maybe it's a whole string of questions, but what's the first question, or what's a sample question that you ask to determine, has the subject object split, collapsed, or not?
Yeah. Well, I would ask, is there an experience of inside and the outside for you? And the person says no. And then I'm asking, well, how is it? No. Can you walk me through that? Or I see that thing is me. And how is that so? Can you tell me how that is so? And so when all pointers lead to the fact, well, because I am the awareness itself, and how otherwise could I be able to see that when I am awareness and there is no seer, there is no seen? And so, let's say it's a set of questions, spontaneous question within the moment. And if all of these questions lead to the same, they point to the same realization, then I see that, okay, this has happened. And often, and I had experience before, when people just, ask, is there an inside or the outside for you? And there is a pause, and you see immediately that the mind is trying to figure out the best answer there.
Yeah, and then it's not their experience.
And then I know that it's not their experience. And the people who actually have that shift, they can talk about it in many different ways, and all of that will point to the same thing again and again. And I would torture them and ask them again and again.
Yeah.
And also I can see that. It's just...
I love that. I love this because it's, in other words, you're asking questions, but it's not about getting the right answers or hearing the right words. It's that you're feeling into where those words are rising from.
Yeah.
It's like, and there's these sort of telltale signs that we don't even think about because we just see them. That, like, sometimes you ask one of these questions and the person sort of blinks at you and it's like, well, how could it not? Like, how could like they're experiencing that place in relation to which the question itself is meaningless, and you see that in them in that moment. Yeah.
There's also the flip side of that story. People shy away sometimes from that recognition because it can be so profoundly simple, debilitatingly simple, and they, having previously imagined this to be a cataclysmic shift, they kind of recognize it and they're like, well, it can't be that. This is too simple. And they walk over it. And then when I invite their attention back, it's like, well, let's have a look there again. And then no, I'm not awake. Hello. How could I be awake? This is this, like, Adyashanti is awake.
Yeah.
Bartoli is awake.
Yeah.
And so a gentle invitation to be with that then really allows that realization to take hold.
And this is another way that concepts mess us up, because we exalt these figures, whether it's modern day enlightened beings or old ones like the Buddha or whatever. We exalt them.
Absolutely.
And then we miss our own awakeness. It's you somehow just miss it.
Yeah.
And because you have the concept that's getting in the way.
Yeah.
And it's I've even seen it happen where the person realizes how simple this is, even though, as we've said, it's also unfathomably deep. But in the first moment of recognition, it's like so freaking simple. And there can even be a kind of release of this pent-up energy that expresses as upsetness of, like, I can't believe I've spent so much fucking money and all these workshops and everything and listened to, bowed to the feet of all these gurus, and this is so simple.
Yeah.
There can even be that expression, and it's real. It can be real that they've really had the recognition, and now this pent-up energy just needs to go, like that.
So true.
Yeah.
So very true that it is that simple. And and that people, especially people who have spent a lot of time in the tradition, they almost subscribe to the game of ever preparing. And this and what they're expecting is that this shift of ascension in a way to something other than what is. Well, if you're looking for what is, what else could it be than what is? This what is right here, right now. And yeah, so overlooking that is just that other, not hazard, but that other thing that can happen to people. And I take care to acclimatize people and just say, hey, let's just stay here. It's simple. It's okay that it's simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when people hear simple, then they think easy. Well, if it's simple, it should be easy.
Mm.
And of course, it is easy in the moment that it is, right? But the reason it's also not easy is because when you're trying to see it, you're still trying to use your mind to see it. And this utter simplicity we're talking about, it's like it dawns on you in the moment that you truly look without the mind.
Right.
Is one way to say it.
Right.
Very
true. And I can see that as well in the work that I do, that people are looking for it. But the funny thing is that the moment you're looking for wholeness, within the wholeness, you're looking for something else. So how do you find wholeness when you are wholeness?
Mm-hmm.
You can't find it because you have already found it. You've never lost it. So the act of finding itself is to miss it. And it's that relaxation that you talk about, just this reposing in your own attention almost. This, all its phraseology and the language that we put on it ultimately results in it noticing itself so effortlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And almost like it's just so effortlessly like that.
Yes, exactly. It's effortless. And then so people think, oh, well, if that's true, I mean, I've heard all these people say this is really hard, and here you're saying it's effortless. So I should be able to do it. But that's the whole problem is I, as separate self, should be able to do it.
Yeah.
That itself is an activity happening within the awareness,
exactly,
which is sort of waiting to quietly notice itself.
Yeah. So it's a funny game in a way.
Yeah.
You just have a conversation. Consciousness is having a conversation with consciousness, and then it's just waiting for it to have had enough of itself as something. But also it is in a way so committed to being you, or to being I, or to being any person, that it is completely free in being that and unraveling, unfolding itself, savoring itself as something to the very last drop, completely believing, completely going through all these different stages. It doesn't have there's a safety belt, okay, I'm infinity, I'm going to now pretend that I'm not, but I really know that I'm infinity. And then it wouldn't be a full experience of this being something, exploring itself as something. So
I love that. It has no safety belt. Yeah, exactly. How could it really fully experience itself in each aspect if it's just pretending while knowing that it's pretending?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it becomes you fully and unconditionally.
Yeah.
It has, we can even phrase it that way, it has abandoned itself as infinity to be you.
Yeah. And then it recognizes itself as infinity.
Yeah.
Which entails the falling away of the self-concept, but not the falling away of you.
That's so true.
Which is something that's hard to explain, but then it becomes, of course, abundantly clear. So when we're talking about, Arthur or Harish or somebody else, the normal listener thinks we're talking about a person, a body-mind person, separate from the whole. But what we're really referring to is a whole world of experience, or we could say the world of experience, seen from a particular vantage point, using vantage point sort of not literally, but it means to say the world of experience, the world of the awareness has different flavors from each vantage point.
Right.
And so so Arthur like accurately denotes not a body mind, but that which is experienced from a particular vantage point.
Yeah, the way I see it, and the way it is for me, the vantage point is really for the infinity. It's not literally referring like my eyes and looking out of my eyes. Arthur is a world. Harish is a world.
Yeah.
And everybody else is the whole world. And that is in itself a vantage point of infinity.
Yeah. And so how do we describe, or if we ever could, the relationship of these worlds? The world of experience as seen from the vantage point we call Arthur, and Harish, like, is it enough to say that all these worlds arise from one and the same absolute no thingness?
Yeah.
Is it, or do we have to, I mean, not that we ever need to say anything, right?
Right.
But how do we explain the coordinated nature of these worlds of experience? Like there's all these meeting points between Arthur world of experience and Harish world of experience, but not just because of the shared paradigm, but like if you meet anyone on the street, there's potential meeting points of experience and a coordinated nature of experience. We can point to a blade of grass and both savor it, even if you're savoring it in different ways. And the one, concepts come in. How do we? You'll just say we don't need to explain it, but how do we account for the coordinated nature of experience, that it arises in this way? Where these worlds of experience are so perfectly interlocked or linked, or however you want to say that.
Well, they all arise in the same place, which is no place. And it's just another of minds trying to impose a structure on it. It's like, there's an assumption that, okay, for them to relate, they must somehow interlink within some sort of spatial thing and then some sort of temporal thing. There must be this relationship which mind wants to understand from the perspective of its time-bound, space-bound reality. There's no way to do that because all of that really is happening within the same nothing and at the same time. If we say there's this universe and then there's that universe and all of that is happening at the same time, well, Harish is one universe and Arthur another universe, and they perfectly unfold within the same space, within the same time, quote, or space, place, quote unquote, which is no place at all. So infinity is not bound to any rules whatsoever, any structure whatsoever. And that is something that the mind will not reconcile, cannot reconcile. It's just this clarity of that grounded in that kind of internal timeless, if you want to use those words. Place, no place. Yeah.
To try to talk about the structural relationships, we would have to be viewing from outside space and time, and there is no language that could be produced from that place. So it's, I mean, that's the thing. We have to accept, I have to accept that we'll never completely understand, like that the mind can't cognitively reflect every aspect of the nature of reality. That from the point of view of the mind, some of it is just going to remain fundamentally mysterious, even if from the point of view of direct experience, it's like you can sense this incredible rightness, almost like harmony. The ancient Greeks had that phrase, the harmony of the spheres. They meant something different by it. But I like that phrase, the harmony of the spheres, because of our spheres of experience are actually all in harmony. Of course, we could see conflict between people, but that's part of a greater pattern, which is essentially harmonious. I sort of cringe using the word because it seems to be applying a kind of value judgment, right? But there's this something that I can only use the word harmony to point towards.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just that it's unity. it's even the word unity is to say too much. It's oneness that is, again, is to say too much. If we don't go into the infinity and different worlds, the awareness that appears is everything, or nothingness that appears is everything, dances as one single move. So a bug that crawls on a leaf and you're drinking coffee, they're in perfect unity. This is the same breath.
Yes, this is what I was trying to point towards with the word harmony. It's something deeper than our concept of oneness, for sure, and it's almost as if, this doesn't capture it either, but it's almost as if that bug can curl on the leaf in exactly the way it does because you're 100 miles away drinking coffee, and vice versa.
And vice versa.
Times infinity.
Right. And so times infinity, exactly. Times infinity. And how this is how we can say correlated, but they're not really correlated. It's just all this world is one single incredible move of infinity. I love that word.
I wish we could talk for a few hours more, but we're coming to the end of our time here, at least for this conversation. And so you mentioned you also do professional coaching, like coaching for professional life, which isn't the same as spiritual coaching, unless the person you're coaching has an awakening, I guess. But you do this professional coach. You do these two kinds. And so someone might ask, why would you bother with the professional or business coaching? If you're doing the non-dual thing and you get to experience that, just why?
Well, then I would ask that person, why wouldn't I bother? As I said, I don't see a mission in bringing non-duality into the world, which is already non-dual, or awakening people. So when people reach out and they're interested in experiencing themselves coming back to what they truly are, well, I'm in service of that. When they come to me and they say, hey, I would love to have a better career, or I would like to feel better, I need well-being in what I do. Well, who am I to say that, no, actually you better get awakened first, right? Well, I'm in service of that, because what I see is happening. The same infinity either wants to come back to itself as infinity, or infinity wants to explore itself as something. And who am I to say what's right, what's wrong? And regardless of what I do, in both the career or professional coaching that I do, there's always inquiry into truth. And so that leads to some sort of, spiritual questioning, if we want to use that word. But generally, it's just, I don't see the difference between one and the other. It's just a beautiful accompanying the same awareness in whatever play it dances.
Yeah, and this is a great point for those who worry about, well, if I have this spiritual awakening, will I be able to still do my life, and do these practical things, or if I work at a corporation, would I still be able to do that? And all the questions, these sorts of questions, right? It's as if they come from a misunderstanding, because that which is already doing all this.
Exactly.
You don't need the separate self-identity for it to do what it's already doing.
Absolutely. And sometimes people shy away from words like purpose and growth and meaning. My invitation when I work with people is just to consider that perhaps all the purpose and meanings are not the end stations and some kind of truths that they need to hold. But why not? If you want to choose this purpose for this day, wonderful, just do it. If you want to choose a purpose for this year or for a lifetime, do it. But when we link this purpose to something inherently deeper, like our safety or our nature, then there might be a confusion when this becomes important, and therefore there's fear and intensity that arises in relation of whether I'm going to do it, achieve or not. And so basically the way I work in my invitation is just to see through the falsity of it, but it's okay for it to be. It's absolutely wonderful for it to be.
So a distinction I make, and I wonder if you agree, is that purpose or mission or agenda, none of that is built in to the universe. They're mental constructs.
Yes.
And of course, mental constructs are part of the one too. But there's an important distinction to make here. That it's not as if the universe has a designed purpose for you that you've got to figure out. That's a mental construct. But what's not a mental construct is desire. The energy of desire is inherently part of things. And so oftentimes when we're identifying a purpose for ourselves or a mission statement or whatever, it's just another way of expressing our hopefully authentic desire, what we're orienting towards, what we feel pulled towards.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's nothing inherent in the universe that is meaningful, that is conceptually meaningful,
right,
or purposeful beyond each and every moment that arises.
Yeah.
The moment desire arises, it has fulfilled itself. The moment your purpose arises, it has fulfilled itself as an arising. And that's it. The rest is just the game.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, that itself is a whole amazing teaching, right? That there's no gap that the mind imagines between like purpose and fulfillment, or between that which the universe wants to do and the fulfillment of that desire, because it arises in whatever way is the natural expression of itself, and with each arising it is fulfilled.
Absolutely so.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's part of this inquiry, this contemplation can be finding these gaps that the mind projects and seeing how they're not there.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah. And also, the purpose and meaning, all these things of importance, concepts of importance, very often link to what we discussed previously, the safety, of the psychological safety, that I need to have this purpose in my life because I need to prove to myself that I'm this other thing rather than this thing that I truly and secretly think I am. And so when that unraveling is done, and in the professional coaching, it arises very quickly, then there's this freedom of just having that purpose. Like you have an apple for breakfast or anything else. You have that purpose or that other purpose. You just experience yourself freely rather than, I must do these things, otherwise I'm not okay.
Wonderful. Okay, so perhaps we'll continue the conversation at some point, because it's always fruitful, and people can. Do you have two different websites for your two kinds of coaching?
It is for now the same. In fact, maybe a little bit confusing for people. There's one website, which is my name.com, arturappazov.com. And then / non-duality is where the non-dual inquiry sits.
Okay, so two different pages on the same site for the professional coaching and non-dual pointing type coaching. And it's fascinating. It'll be interesting to see if people hop from one to the other or not. It depends on the people.
That depends on the people. And also when you go to the / non-duality page, you can go to the general website, but from general, there's no link to the non-duality page.
Okay. So we'll provide both links. And it's wonderful to speak with you and just share.
Likewise, really wonderful.
Yeah. Sublime. And, if it wasn't a podcast format, I think we would have had long moments of silence, just experiencing, because there's that pull when you were talking about it to just go into it wordlessly. but our readers are probably glad we don't have the 5 minutes of silence here and there. So anyway, it's a joy, and we'll talk again. And may this conversation be for the benefit of all beings. May it be for a blessing, as may all of our endeavors be.
May it be.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you, Harish.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember, you can always find out more about the tradition of non-dual Shaiva Tantra at tantrailluminated.org, where, if you wish, you can become a subscriber to our online learning portal, and you'll receive access to a vast number of recordings, including a comprehensive curriculum in tantric philosophy, tantric yoga, guided meditation, and much, much more. Music for the podcast composed and recorded by Ann Leader. Find her at annleader.com. Podcast produced by Grazia Tribulato. New episodes drop every week, and may all beings benefit.